Hi, and thanks for joining me for another Tunisian crochet tutorial. Today we're going to learn to add length to a Tunisian crochet piece and to subtract length or travel across the row without adding height just by slip stitching. So in front of me I've got my completed or nearly completed solid piece of Tunisian simple stitch, just like I've worked in previous videos. So you can check those out if you need to learn those basic steps first. And I'm going to complete the return pass on this piece. So nothing fancy going on right now. I'm just going to complete this row. So I'll tie these loose ends off just really quick so that they don't pry loose on this next part. Make sure my stitches aren't too crushed at the end where I tied that knot. So here's my Tunisian simple stitch piece, and it's got a certain length, and if I need to add length to either side, I'm going to use the methods in this video. To start, we want to add length first to the side of our dominant hand. So for me, that's my right hand, and I'm on the right side of the piece. So I'm going to go ahead and chain 5 stitches just off the side of the beginning of that row. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that is treated as the foundation chain for a new part of Tunisian crochet. So we've just added length by adding another piece of foundation chain off the side, and we're going to work that foundation chain exactly as you would for normal crochet. So we skip the first chain because our first loop is already on the hook, and I'm going to work in the bottom of the chain stitches, so that's the one loop on the other side, and pull up a loop from each of those chain stitches. So count 5 carefully. So remember, the first loop was already on the hook, and I'm going to draw 4 more. And we get to the first actual stitch of the row we were working, and usually that first stitch is already on the hook because you have a loop drawn up. But since you chained to add a new foundation, that's not the case. We're going to actually work that very first stitch of the Tunisian simple stitch. And then we're just back to working the regular Tunisian stitches across our row. So that is length added on the dominant hand side, and that is the first thing you do before you complete the rest of the row, is add that extra length off the side, and then you can continue on down the row. So if you're left-handed, that's going to be on the left side because you start and end your Tunisian rows on the left side rather than the right. And here I'm reaching the end of my row, and I'll just lay this out real quick so you can see. I've got my square, and it's got an extra little arm coming off, and then I've worked back across that and across the entire other row. Now I'd like to add length to my non-dominant side, but you can't chain just from the left side. So there's 2 different methods you can do to get a foundation chain onto that side. And again, you're left-handed, this will be on your right side. This is the non-dominant side. So one video, which I've already posted, covers something called Tunisian foundation stitch. And that is a way to create a row of Tunisian stitches without working a foundation chain first. And since I've already covered that in that video, I'm not going to go into detail about it here, but you can see me doing it right now. I'm just working off the non-dominant side, and I've created this length of foundation Tunisian stitches, which work the chain and the first stitch at the same time. So that's Tunisian foundation stitch. And again, check out that other video. The second method is to create a separate length of chain and then attach it to that end. And to do that, you either need to cut the yarn that you're working or you need to get another skein or ball of yarn to work from, because you're going to need an unattached length of yarn to create a separate chain. You'll also need a regular hook the same size as your Tunisian hook. So that's a 650. The one I've got on screen is a K hook, 650 millimeter. And what you'll do is you'll take that regular hook and your yarn that you're using and just create a basic chain length of however many Tunisian stitches you need to add onto that side. So I'm just doing, I don't know, a few, I think 7 here. And then once you have your separate chain, you just attach it with a slip stitch to the back of the final Tunisian stitch on that side. So I use this little back loop here. It's kind of sticking out on this piece because I've already worked into it. You might have to dig around for it a little bit more than I am here. And I'm just going to insert my hook through that loop. There's a lot of strings here. So I've got my hook inserted through the loop, and I'm just going to yarn over and make a slip stitch. And once I've done that, I have my extra chain attached, and I can cut the yarn, or I just yanked it here, and then draw that through. And you can weave in all those ends later. It looks a little messy at first. So this is what I call the chain length join method of adding length to the non-dominant side of a piece of Tunisian crochet. So now that we've got this chain attached, just like with the dominant side, just use it as a foundation chain to pull up your crochet stitches. Do count carefully, because that first one there is the slip stitch that attaches the chain, and you don't want to work that as a stitch because it's not. So making sure I've got my count correct, I go ahead and work into the first actual chain stitch of that foundation and just pull up a loop from each of the bottom of those chain stitches, just like I did on the other side. And now that I've got length added on both sides, I've got an entire new row made. And I just work back across that row to complete the return pass. So on this single row, I've started with a chain on the dominant side to work a new length on that side. And then I worked a regular stitch into each of the previous stitches. And then another chain from which I pulled up another set of loops on the opposite or non-dominant side. So here I just finished up my row. And there's my Tunisian simple stitch piece with length added on the right and the left sides. Now if you wanted to get rid of some of that length or return to a smaller width of your piece, you can use the slip stitch into Tunisian crochet. And here I'm going to start by making the same insertion I would for a Tunisian simple stitch. And I'll just complete that stitch by yarning over and drawing through all loops on a hook. It's just a regular slip stitch, not different, except for the way that you're inserting your hook. And this allows you to travel across Tunisian crochet without adding height, so you can get across a row and shorten it. It also makes a very neat edge for that loose row that's always at the top of Tunisian crochet. So it does also neaten up those stitches if you don't like that loose way that looks. And you can also insert your hook as if you were going to do a Tunisian knit stitch, and that changes the way the slip stitch looks on the fabric slightly. So if you're working onto Tunisian knit stitch and you want to make a slip stitch border, or you want to travel without adding height, you can also insert your hook the same ways that you would for the regular stitch, and that changes how those slip stitches sit on the Tunisian stitches. See, one side looks like it's Tunisian knit stitch and the other looks like it's Tunisian simple stitch, and all I had to do was change how I was inserting my hook. So to return to regular Tunisian stitching, you'll take the last loop that you've got on the hook, and that's going to count as your first Tunisian stitch. And you'll just continue working across the row as if normal. I'm going to go ahead and do Tunisian knit stitch here because I like it. Oh, got a hair in the yarn. That happens a lot. So I'm just going to keep stitching away happily here, and I hope this is helpful for you. And if you have any questions about these methods or my content, just leave me a comment and I'll try to get back to you. And if you like this content, you should like and subscribe. And I do have several Tunisian crochet patterns listed on the free and paid pattern section on my blog, so you should check that out. Thanks.